The Sabres score 4 unanswered as they stun the Maple Leafs. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs fell 4-3 to the Buffalo Sabres. And this one started well for the Maple Leafs. A strong 20 minutes, did not score a goal, but then coming out of the gates in the second, the Maple Leafs did strike twice. Austin Matthews and Calle Jarnkrok with a pair of goals early in the frame, but you would have thought maybe they would keep things going, and the absolute reverse happened, Dave. The Buffalo Sabres turned things around. They, as I mentioned, they score 4 unanswered. William Nylander gets one late, but the Leafs lose this one 4-3, a tough one tonight, especially coming off a couple of big games last week against New Jersey and Edmonton. And the first thought that I had in my mind when this was all going down was, oh, geez, like here we go again where, you can't say this every time they lose to a team that they should beat or, they're winning a game that they should win. It happens in hockey. Teams blow 2-goal leads all the time. That's why they say, it's the hardest lead to hold in the game, the 2-goal lead. But when you're a team that has aspirations of going a long way and you're a veteran squad that, should be able to close out these type of games, it, does creep into the back of your mind that, like, is this happening again? Where the Leafs are, shooting themselves in the foot when they should just be able to cruise in a game where they're up 2-0 in the second period.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because we used to talk about these Buffalo Sabres as a basement-dwelling team, and so whenever the Leafs would lose to a team like that, it would kind of have this air of complete disappointment. But I mean, Buffalo is desperate. They have a desperation. They're in the dogfight to try and get one of those wild card spots. Have been on a team that's been surging. And even though the Toronto Maple Leafs had a big game against them not too long ago there, like, it's pretty easy to forget that Buffalo's a pretty good team. They're not a top team, but they've got a lot of young talent, and they're on a team that kind of resembles maybe the early Toronto Maple Leafs days of 2016-17, where, they've got some pieces to build on. They've got power, they've got Dahlin, they've got a lot of high-end draft picks that are now starting to mature, and they're starting to kind of find their groove. So I'm not necessarily surprised the Leafs lost this game. Sure, it was disappointing that you have a 2-0 lead and then it goes flat. I think the bigger concern was the fact that they went, I think it was 14 minutes without a shot on goal in that middle frame, where it just looked like they just weren't engaged and had no urgency whatsoever. And yeah, they've protected leads and that happens, but you've got to have some forecheck, and they just didn't seem to have any of it. And I think Sheldon Keefe described his team as kind of tired in that spot. And what Buffalo does is they spend a lot of time, and they're one of the top teams in terms of offensive zone possession time. So, yeah, I see a lot of the Maple Leafs of the early core days in this Buffalo Sabres team, at least this edition now, and not really surprised that they were kind of able to kind of find a groove and pull a victory on the road like this.
Yeah, and they are the third highest scoring team in the National Hockey League, so they have tons of firepower. So it shouldn't be surprising that they're able to score, at will occasionally, and it feels like just an avalanche coming down the way for the Sabres. But the Leafs, as you mentioned, they went through a stretch there where they just did not generate much offense at all. And after that second goal by Calle Jarnkrok that made it 2-0 for the Leafs, they got outshot, I believe, 15-0 for the rest of the second period, which is absolutely horrific. And I know Sheldon Keefe did mention in the postgame that might have been the worst second period the Leafs have played all season long. Just taking a look at the numbers here, the Sabres with 32 shot attempts in the second period to just 5 for the Maple Leafs, and they scored twice on those 5 shots, which is truly incredible. And then, of course, in the third period, the Sabres take the lead, and then the Leafs make a late charge at that point. But it was really the second period where, despite coming out with the lead, the Leafs did. It just felt like the Sabres were able to turn around the momentum. And Calle Jarnkrok, as we mentioned, had the Maple Leafs' second goal of the night. He was asked post-game about that second period and said that the Leafs' effort level dipped after his goal.
Yeah, I kind of felt like we kind of stopped working out there. and that's why they had 16 shots and we had 0, like you said. It's tough to win if you're not working out there.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's hard to say, as far as the energy level goes, Dave. I mean, they did have a day off on Sunday. They played a pretty big emotional game against the Edmonton Oilers. But prior to that, they had, a few days off in between that game and the Devils game last Tuesday. But now that they've, gone to this 11 forward, 7 defenseman setup, the forwards are playing a lot. And again, tonight, part of it was because they were chasing the game at the end there. And, with the empty net, the big stars were out there. But, Marner, Matthews, and Nylander all pushing, over 22 minutes tonight, which is, a lot of time. And, these guys, of course, I'm sure they love playing a lot of ice time, but it did feel like there were stretches in this game in the latter half where maybe the legs just weren't there where they maybe were in the first, 40 minutes of this game.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because they do this 11-7 and it's apart from some of the other issues when it comes to just making sure the right people are deployed, especially on the offensive side because of the odd numbering there in addition to the defense. You kind of get mixed and matched a little bit. So you can kind of question, do these forwards need to be logging that many minutes in a game that in the grand scheme of things doesn't hold a lot of significance? Sure, they're trying to hold on to second, but they really can't go to first in the division, given where Boston is. So it's a tough one. It's tough. But at the same time, the Leafs need to kind of get their defense going. Luke Schenn is going to come back. It could be back as soon as Wednesday. And then at that point, are you going to take 2 guys out to make room for Luke Schenn, or do you just go for another 7 defenseman deployment because you got to get these guys playing and you don't have Ryan O'Reilly, which is a lot of the reason why you are going with 11 forwards. So it's a difficult, tricky balance. I mean, we do a post-game show. We've got to react to the game, but there's also the grand scheme of things as well, which is, yeah, they're playing a lot, but do they need to play a lot in that situation? Or is that self-inflicted because they didn't get the job done and their goals came when they weren't necessarily playing very well? So that's a tough one. It really is. I don't disagree that 7 defensemen is right, at least for now. And I know we put the question out to the listeners, but yeah, it's going to be he may be tempted to kind of go back to 12-6 just because of the way things went now. But I'm not against the 11-7 every now and then to get these guys going, especially the defense, because they're so loaded in that spot that they just really need to get the minutes up for these guys.
Yeah, and of course the 11-7 will be a talking point yet again tomorrow, I imagine, for a lot of Leafs Nation. Let's hear from the head coach, Sheldon Keefe, who talked about the different deployment that he's had to put out recently due to some injuries and obviously new faces with the team.
I mean, we want to win. We want to win every game, and that's our approach. We're trying to put our players in the best spot possible to win every game, while also having an eye towards what's coming, whether that's, trying different things that you may want to look at certain times, or sometimes maybe you have to, right around this time last year, our line of Bunting, Matthews, and Marner was tearing apart the league, and Matthews was rolling through, and then right before the playoffs started, Michael Bunting gets injured, and all of a sudden we need to find a new left winger to play there. So different things happen that I think you want to get ahead of. That's just one example of things that can change. So, we are certainly trying some things that are with an eye towards either scenarios that might happen or like we talked about yesterday. I mean, with the 7 defensemen, you get Gustafsson involved. I just think it's important, here with O'Reilly's injury, that you have these guys in the lineup and in uniform and with your group, because you never know if or when you're going to need them.
So while some people may want some of these guys to sit, Dave, because maybe they don't think they're going to start the playoffs, whether it's, a Luke Schenn or an Eric Gustafsson, Zach Aston-Reese, I mean, the list goes on and on of these, depth players that the Leafs currently have. I mean, I think Sheldon Keefe makes a good point that they still have to get these guys in there and, they need to get used to the system. They need to get to their lineups. You don't know when you're going to need an Eric Gustafsson. And if he's, sitting for the final 16 games of the season without getting any real game time, like you can only do so much in practice and prepare for it. Not saying that the Leafs need to go 11-7 for the rest of the season. I'm sure they're going to switch back to 12-6 at some point and just kind of rotate guys in and out. But Sam Lafferty, of course, Gustafsson was mentioned, Luke Schenn, like these guys have to get used to everything. So this is the time to be, making these types of moves and tinkering. I think 11-7 maybe is stretching it sometimes because I do see, right now with these tough games that the Leafs are playing, a lot of these forwards are getting a little overworked right now, and they're playing a lot of minutes. And, that's a tough balancing act because as Sheldon Keefe said, you want to win these games, but, you're trying to take a look towards the future here. But, from at least that standpoint of all the new faces, I get it that, he's trying to get these guys acclimated to what they do.
Yeah, I mean, William Nylander had 22 minutes and 24 seconds in this game. And so that's a lot. That's especially for a second line deployment that got overloaded and you do a lot of different things. That's going to happen. And there obviously is going to be a risk of burning these guys out. You don't want to do that. Which is why I think, when it's 2-0 and then they play the way they did, they kind of put themselves in that situation where they have to come from behind and Keith's competitive juices go where he's going to not put out the shutdown guys for that third period. He's going to coach the way he's coached, which is put the stars out, make sure that, they do what they can to try and come from behind. And they almost did it toward the end of the game there, but in the end, they still lose. And yeah, it is going to be tough. But yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with him. I mean, you don't want to do it on just the tail end of back-to-backs, and that's it either, because we know those games are kind of meaningless. Players don't get into a groove. If they play once and then they don't play again for a long stretch of games, it really is not any sort of baseline to go by. So they can't do it in that regard. So, this is the time. Luke Schenn is going to come back, and they're going to have to try and find time for him. And, they did have him in for the one game, I do believe, or maybe it wasn't one. I can't remember which one they didn't have, or they went back to 12-6. I think it was the game in New Jersey. They went back to 12-6. So it wasn't Luke Schenn. So Schenn's only been around for 7 defensemen as well. So I got to think with someone who hasn't skated with the team for a while and hasn't played, getting him in a 7 defenseman situation probably makes the most sense. And I think we're just going to keep seeing it regardless of the outcome tonight.
Yeah, it's just going to be a topic of conversation until Sheldon Keefe decides to go the other way. But, had the Leafs won this game, I mean, I don't think this is a topic of conversation. I think part of it is because they did lose in the fashion and the way that they did. But, just hearing Sheldon Keefe's post-game comments, he makes some sense there. I think as well, people are pointing out, and rightly so, that a few weeks ago when, reporters asked him about it, he's like, it's not really optimal. And then now he's kind of changing his tune a little bit, and he doesn't mind it as much. I mean, even I heard it in the morning skate today where he was, comparing it to the Tampa Bay Lightning, who frequently ran 11-7 lineups en route to a couple of Stanley Cups. So, kind of using that as an example of, a successful team that is.
Luke Schenn was that 7th defenseman a lot of the times too. In those cup runs. Yeah.
So Luke Schenn definitely familiar with that spot, and maybe that's what they do come playoff time. But 11-7, we're going to keep talking about it for at least the next couple of weeks. I would have to think. We're also going to be talking a lot about the goaltending, Dave, and Matt Murray tonight had some moments where maybe wasn't great, very similar to the other night against the Edmonton Oilers. The difference here is that he's on the losing end as opposed to the winning side on Saturday. It's now 5 straight games. I think I had to look it up to make sure I was correct, but 5 straight games that he's given up 4 goals, and that's not great for a guy that's trying to work his way back. It was interesting to hear Sheldon Keefe talk about how, while the numbers do look terrible, he thought Murray was good. could that be just a little bit of, the coach not wanting to bury a guy when maybe the confidence is a little bit low right now? I mean, that's probably not what Keefe wants to do at this point. He's, trying to get Matt Murray and his game turned around. But what did you make of Murray's performance tonight in this one?
Yeah, it was so-so. It was better. I thought it was better than the win. Like, he had some good saves and when they were down 3-1, which led to the 7-4 win, the comeback win against the Oilers on Saturday. But I thought his performance tonight was a little better. I mean, it's not saying much because you're still giving up 4 goals. And it's just kind of funny, the scenario and circumstances where this is going to get criticized. If it was a different goaltender, you would be hearing, like, I remember quotes from about Mrazek afterwards, like where Keefe would just be like, you can't win games when you give up 4 goals. And you can't win games when you only score a certain amount of goals. And so it's kind of funny to me that they're in this situation where they are left with no choice but to build up Matt Murray's confidence and hope he digs out of it, because the Leafs made a conscientious decision going into the season that this was their goaltending tandem. And then they made another decision that they didn't need to bolster it at the trade deadline. And Ilya Samsonov has performed pretty well, but to their admission, he's not 100%, although he's still playing through whatever, who is 100% at this time of year, quote unquote, hockey cliche, all that stuff. But they're going to rely on Matt Murray at some point if Samsonov struggles. And I think between now and the end of the season, everything is about the commitment they have to him and to try and get him into a set where they feel that they can put him into a situation in the playoffs and they can win. Whether that's a starter, definitely not at this point. But the fact that he's going to play, maybe half the games, he's going to split them. If he does eventually find his game, it's going to be a different kind of conversation. But they got one more year committed to Murray, and Samsonov is a restricted free agent after this year. And I think they just know the commitment, the time that they spent with Murray, and the Leafs seem hell-bent on making sure that they've done everything in their power to make it a success.
Yeah, and it's such a weird season that he's had, because it's not as if he, has been this poor all season long, right? Like, there was a stretch at the beginning of the year when he was on his roll where everybody was like, wow, like the Leafs have figured something out here with Matt Murray. They have, found his level that he had a couple of years ago. And then, of course, things started to dip a little bit and he got hurt and he was gone for 6 weeks. So, now since he's come back, he's allowed 4 goals in 3 straight games. And, I don't think anybody really knows where his game is at right now, but it's not as if, like I said, he's been bad all season. He has shown glimpses. He's even stolen them some games this year. So, you can't say it's been a complete failure with Matt Murray. I think if you had said before the season, if you got, this type of full season performance and you look at the numbers for Matt Murray, maybe there would have been some people that would have expected more based on his pedigree. But, considering the way things have gone for him the last couple of seasons in Ottawa, I think you definitely would have taken this from Matt Murray. And obviously, Ilya Samsonov has been an absolute find for the Maple Leafs this year. But, you just have a little bit of hope still, just a tiny glimmer that maybe there's something there for Matt Murray to rediscover what he had earlier this season. But let's hear from the Maple Leafs netminder who spoke about his game after this one.
Felt pretty good, especially through 2 periods. And I think, that third period, they get a couple good looks and capitalize on them. Just got to make an extra save there, but it felt pretty good for the most part.
How have you felt since coming back this time in general?
Yeah, I've been feeling better and better every game, including tonight. I felt better and better. So that's that's all I can do right now is just look to keep improving and getting better and better each and every day.
The one thing I find interesting about Matt Murray's post-game comments, and I wonder if you feel the same, is that, he does talk like a veteran, where it's like, I hate to use the example of, Jack Campbell, but, that was a guy that was very much hard on his sleeve. if he had a bad performance, and sometimes even if he had a good performance, he would, blame himself for a lot of the mistakes that went in the back of the net. Whereas, Matt Murray has this game tonight, and it's true. Like, I agree with you as well. Like, he was definitely better than he was Saturday, but he gives up 4 goals, and I mean, he kind of talks as if like he gave up no goals, right? He's just kind of like, it is what it is. Like, I think, he's got that mindset, right? He's a guy that's been there and done it, realizes that, one night he might give up 4 goals. The next night he's hoping to bounce back and be better. But I kind of do like that about him, that he does seem pretty even keel, and that, it's not a situation where, he has been struggling and he's coming out in the media and saying, yeah, like, I just don't know what's happening. Like, my game, like, even if he does believe that, he's not letting on that maybe things are not where he wants them to be right now.
Yeah, he's got the veteran non-emotion that most people desire from goaltenders. The ability to kind of quickly move past anything that has just happened, whether it's good or bad. They say the number one trait of a goaltender is to have a short memory, right? So you see that in some of the other top goaltenders and around the league when it comes to how they talk about their game. Jake Ottinger is an excellent example of that, where he just kind of, he'll show some personality, but he just kind of, rolls with the punches and doesn't necessarily let any sort of small thing get to him. That's not to say that goalies who are emotional, some of them aren't successful. And like the thing I like with Samsonov is he's authentic in the way he's trying to communicate stuff. And we'll mention working on the mental aspect and all that other stuff, but he's bought in, like, for the most part, with the exception of a dip in his game in December. He's really been a stable force in the net for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it's good. There's a lot to like about Matt Murray off the ice that way and his accomplishments in the past. But does it give you confidence for the future? I don't know. It's like reading a technical line on a stock chart. You'd think it would be going one way, but no one can predict the future. And so the Leafs just have to hope that his veteran savviness can click and hit at the time they absolutely need it, whether it's game 1 or later in the series, if Ilya Samsonov struggles, and just being able to kind of push aside all these things. Even when we ask him about looking ahead to stuff, he's like, I just try to take it one day at a time. It's the most annoying answer I hear anyone give, but it's probably what the Leafs like to hear, because he's just kind of staying in the moment, which is what goaltenders need to do.
Yeah, the Maple Leafs definitely need Matt Murray to pay dividends as we continue the stock puns. Moving along, though, let's talk about some positives in this one. And Auston Matthews, we talked about it after Saturday that he seems to have kicked it into another gear here, which is good. 3 straight games now with a goal. This combination of him and Mitch Marner has been magic all season long, of course, and it continued tonight. That impressive goal by Matthews there. Got to give kudos to Alex Kerfoot with the soccer pass with the kick. I don't know if he did that intentionally, but it was a great setup for Matthews on the first goal of the game for the Maple Leafs. But Kerfoot, yeah. Oh, man, it was right there for the taking, and I just did not go with it. But Auston Matthews spoke about this one afterwards and says the Sabres definitely got the better of the Leafs in this one.
I think, the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes was pretty solid, and give ourselves a lead, and they cut the lead into half and kind of tilt the ice their way. A lot of penalties kind of took the flow out of the game, and I just think little battles, little 50-50 pucks. Maybe we just weren't as hard as we needed to be, and they were on the opposite end of coming out of those.
I think that's sort of the one positive of the Leafs right now that I'm really taking away from that. Auston Matthews has seemingly found that level, like I said, that he has shown previously. And, we've been waiting for a decent stretch of it. I mean, this year there's been some games where he has been very active and he has been very engaged. And then maybe the next game, the play dips a little bit. But even if he hadn't scored tonight, Dave, I mean, I thought yet again, he looked like that guy that's, battling in the corners, using that physicality, getting up in the rush, getting up and down the ice, of course, back checking and working in his own zone. And, you think back to that game against Vancouver where he takes that shot off the leg. And I think a lot of people thought the absolute worst that, oh no, maybe the season is over for Auston Matthews. But seemingly it has woken him up. it has jolted him ever since that game, and it's now 3 in a row where he has been really strong in my eyes.
Yeah, and maybe the other thing that kind of woke him up was accidentally injuring his teammate and Ryan O'Reilly in that same game. But it's incredible how perspective changes when he's just putting points on the board, or more importantly, playing to his identity, which is being a prolific goal scorer. And so getting those goals highlights all the other things that we already knew he was doing anyway, but you're no longer concerned about anymore. Remember, we talked about the block shots and how he was leading among all forwards in doing that before he took that shot there on what looked like the inside of the knee. And then some of the other stuff that he was doing from the back check and the hitting a little bit more he was doing earlier in the season, and all those things combined to win battles he was doing. It was perhaps a better Austin Matthews suited for the playoffs, but it was early in the regular season. And so when the points weren't there, people were starting to get concerned, even though Mitch Marner was playing beyond his career numbers. And same with William Nylander, who tied his record for actually he eclipsed it tonight with scoring the goal tonight, but new career high in goals for William Nylander. And then John Tavares finding his offensive ability at even strength after he struggled at stretches with that last season. So yeah, maybe it was Austin Matthews' turn to kind of fly under the radar, but he really wasn't. And like there wasn't like he wasn't a force out there. He was still someone that the opposing teams had to be concerned about. And so it freed up everybody else. He stayed with his 200-foot game and his defensive responsibilities. And yeah, he's been dealing with a couple of things earlier this season, but this is where he has to shine. And more importantly, he has to ramp it up further when the games take on a big meaning here. And I think that's really what he's been talking about every day whenever we've talked to him about where he wants his game to be, is what the team is looking to try and get. So it's good that he's starting to ramp up a little bit with the points here. These are the points that the Leafs are going to need him to get when the month shifts to April and the games take on a whole new meaning.
Yeah, you don't want to say, every single night that, there's a matchup that maybe motivates him, but you look at these last 3 games, and of course the Oilers and Connor McDavid on Saturday. Before that, it's Jack Hughes and the Devils, and then tonight it's Tage Thompson, another guy that Matthews is very familiar with, so maybe there is some extra motivation. And then, of course, come Wednesday, it's Nathan McKinnon. So, beyond that, you've got some big games this weekend, of course, against Carolina, and then you've got another one on the back-to-back in Ottawa against the Senators, a team that Austin Matthews historically has tortured. So, maybe there's just a lot on his mind right now. And I'm sure, he's heard some of the criticism about his game of late. And maybe that's played into, what we've seen the last little bit here from Austin Matthews. But coming up on Rink Wide Toronto, we will get to the Bodog line of the day. We'll talk about William Nylander and that career high 35th goal of the season, and talk a little bit about Michael Bunting as well, who I thought had a strong game and is maybe turning the corner a little bit as the Maple Leafs fall to the Buffalo Sabres 4-3. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It's Rink Wide Toronto. Pre-game, post-game, every game. It is Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena. Sabres coming into Toronto and beating the Maple Leafs 4-3 this evening. We will get to William Nylander and his career-high 35 goals and talk a little Michael Bunting as well. But time for the Bodog line of the day. And if you had to make a bet before the season, David, that Calle Jarnkrok would be on pace to set a career high in goals, not sure how many people would have taken the over, especially considering how poor his start was and just really struggled to find any sort of chemistry. People questioning the signing and what the heck is Kyle Dubas doing with this guy. But since then, has found a role, found an identity on this team, occasionally playing in the top 6, occasionally playing in the bottom 6. But Yeah, I mean, he scores tonight, and you just look at the full season numbers, and you go, "Wow, it's pretty good for a guy making $2 million."
So I remember I think it was Nashville was in town. We haven't been to Nashville yet this season. That's coming up in a little while. But when Nashville was in town, Philip Forsberg said that Calle Yarncroke is capable of a lot of great things in the top six if you keep him there. If you give him those minutes and you give him skilled guys to play with, he can do it just about as good as anybody, which I thought was a pretty telling quote. And it actually has summed up his year because early on when he was struggling, they had him as a third line winger, kind of moving around, and they moved him to center for one game, and that was horrible. And he just couldn't kind of figure out his bearings. Then he had looked like a possible groin injury, was out for a little bit, came back. Sheldon Keefe said that not even just situationally, because he was coming into a new situation, new town, that the time away while dealing with the injury also allowed him to kind of calibrate things and settle things at home. And so since that time, he's really kind of taken off. But when the Leafs were experimenting with that spread out offense and putting Ryan O'Reilly on the third line and putting Yarncroke on the second line, I think that is their optimal look, because I think they've come to realize that when Yarncroke is in that bottom six, it's just not good. And even you can argue whether he should be in the top six or not. But if you're not getting a quality Yarncroke in the bottom six, it kind of solves that argument for you, because the only other alternative is not playing him. And when you make a commitment to a guy like that, and he has that offensive ability when you put him in those situations, that's not going to be an optimal situation either. So second line winger seems to be the right spot, and he looked pretty good in this role. He wasn't that tonight, but didn't matter because that third line's getting a lot of minutes anyway. But I think when it's all said and done, I think if they do that spread out offense with everybody healthy, Yarncroke on that second line winger is probably where he should be.
Yeah, I think he definitely fills that role nicely. And, I think it's good that, he can play up in the lineup. It's, kind of similar to Alex Kerfoot a little bit, where it's a guy that can, play on any line, really, if you put him on it. It's just, unfortunately for Kerfoot this year, the finishing ability hasn't been there. And for Yarncroke, it definitely has the last few months here as he scores his 15th goal of the season in a losing cause. But as I mentioned, just, based off of where things started, it's been a pretty surprising turnaround. And, he's just one of the more solid contributors on this Leafs team. Like, you pretty much know every night what you're going to get from this guy. He's going to skate hard. He's going to, dig in the corners. He's going to, occasionally, rip a shot and score a pretty impressive goal. And he's going to give effort. And, I think it's going to be interesting to see, where he fits come playoff time, if he is playing in the top six or if he, moves down to a third line role. But he's definitely been a solid addition to this Maple Leafs team so far this season. Meanwhile, as we mentioned, Willie Nylander scoring his career high 35th goal of the season. Unfortunately, came a little bit too late. It was the third goal for the Maple Leafs, and they fall short in this one by 1 goal to the Buffalo Sabres. But, I thought there were a few moments tonight where, Nylander showed off his, rush ability on that goal specifically. Had a breakaway early in the third period that he wasn't able to put home either. But, he just continues to have these games, Dave, where, he can take it over at any moment. It wasn't a perfect game by any means for William Nylander tonight, but, just talk about his season on a whole, because, coming in, I think a lot of people thought, there was another gear and another level for this guy to take it to. And, now seeing him on pace for over 40 goals, you just wonder, he's 26 years old. He's still in the prime of his career and maybe, getting to that prime of his career. But like, what do you think is the next level here for William Nylander? Is there another notch?
Yeah. And is that with this team beyond this next season? Like, that's the other question you got to ask yourself, because he's playing with a loaded amount of talent here, which helps in that regard. But he's certainly able to now show that he can drive some of that himself. So if he continues to show that he can drive that and drive a line, like, what I'm curious about, do you remember late last season when the Leafs had what their lineup was and they put Nylander on the third line with just other bottom six guys to see. It wasn't a punishment, but it was just to kind of see if he can push it. I think the Leafs could put him in that formation and he could drive a line now. I think that's the step. And that's what I would actually like to see, even if it was for 1 or 2 games. Give him Lafferty, which he already's played with this year, on a third line, and give him another winger and see what that does. And if he can continue to push that play, maybe it's Yarncroke, like they've tried in that spot. If he can push the play and do that stuff without any of the other core forwards alongside him, which has been the case for a majority, if not almost the entirety of his NHL career, that's really the next step in my eyes. And so if he shows that, then you start to get into the, he could be a big role player for the Leafs next year, of course, but then what's the cost? And where does he factor in? And does he test the open market while you still have Austin Matthews to deal with? That's where that window gets a little tricky. And so the future is bright for William Nylander. If he has a big playoff, that'll certainly go a long way as well. 2 of the last 3 playoffs, I've actually been kind of satisfied with William Nylander's game in that regard. So if he can take it to another level there, that would be great. But I want to see him drive a line by himself because they flirted with it before. It didn't work out very well, but they have time now between now and the end of the season to see if he can do it. And I think that will be the real test to see exactly how far Nylander's come in his game.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've, tried to play it in my mind as you just did there. Could he potentially go to a third line? And, in my mind, I'm still thinking that optimally it's Ryan O'Reilly as the third line center. And if, Sheldon Keefe had more trust in William Nylander's defensive game, maybe he is, riding shotgun along there with Ryan O'Reilly, but I just don't think he does. So, I'm not sure, that's a third line that you want to be running out there. Nylander, Tavares do seem to have that chemistry, and we'll get to that line tonight that had Michael Bunting on the left wing. But for a guy that's on pace to put up 100 points, I just don't know if, putting him in a third line spot is really the most optimal. And I understand that, you can, as Sheldon Keefe can, he can just, run out guys in all different kind of combinations as we're seeing right now. But Willie Nylander, for me, has to be one of the 3 guys that's getting the most ice time. Very similar to what we saw tonight, where it was, Matthews, Marner, and Nylander 1, 2, 3 when it came to ice time with the forwards. The guy's just having such an incredible season. You just cannot afford to not have him out there as much as possible. But kind of just goes back to what we were talking before with Sheldon Keefe and how he's trying to figure out right now what he has and what he can do and what kind of combinations might work come playoff time. But I think, with the season that he's had, William Nylander, you feel pretty confident anytime that he steps on the ice. But that line tonight, Michael Bunting, William Nylander, John Tavares, statistically, probably the Leafs' best lineup in this game against the Buffalo Sabres. They outshot their opponents 16-4 as far as shot attempts go, which was really nice to see. This is a lineup this year, a trio that has not been particularly good. I think I was looking at it earlier. Their expected goals as a trio this year in about 25 minutes is 35%. Which is not very good, but at least for tonight at 5-on-5 and 7 minutes and 24 seconds, they were at 81.9% as far as the expected goals go. But, as far as Michael Bunting goes, after a couple of horrendous games here against New Jersey and Edmonton, I thought he was really good tonight. I mean, he was doing Michael Bunting things. He was digging out pucks behind the net. He was making some plays. If he scores that 2-on-0 goal with John Tavares, maybe we're having a different conversation of, maybe he's one of the stars of this game. But I just thought overall, Dave, it was nice to see him get back to what makes him successful.
Yeah, and just the caveat on that one line, when the minutes are so low over a long period of time, I see a lot of those low expected goals. And usually I chalk that up to a lot of that being in transition, right? Like a guy not supposed to be out there. And as a result, there's an assignment missed or something, right? So I'm not overly surprised that despite what it was there, that they were still able to kind of click and find the rhythm together. I think it was similar that I saw in a defense pair that had like with Riley and someone else. I'm like, why is the expected goal? So I'm like, oh, okay. Because the minutes are low. And so probably when they were playing together, it's because they weren't supposed to be there. But anyway, I really like how Michael Bunting is, kind of getting back to his game, kind of taking a lot of the distractionary stuff out and trying not to make that a focal point. One of my biggest pet peeves with Leaf discourse, and I know this is a Leaf pod, and so I apologize if I offend anyone out there, but there's just so much focus on what the officials are doing and the bad calls and all this other stuff, and it's so not productive. It's so like, I don't know, like I get it. You're spurned from other stuff that happened, and it happens, and yeah, the calls suck. Look, we grew up watching Kerry Fraser in Game 6, right? In that, the Wayne Gretzky high stick on Doug Gilmour. We get it. This shit happens all the time, but you have to move past it. There's a human element to this game. You have to know how to play the game. And that's the game with the officials and all that other stuff too. Move past all that stuff. Know how to play the political part of it, whether you agree with it or not. That's life. And then only then can you move past the excuses. And so I think Michael Bunting, just like any other, technically he's a sophomore, doesn't have that many games of NHL experience, but some of the other guys do now. And it's on them that they can just say, look, play with the emotion, do all that stuff, but just move past all this stuff and don't let a bad penalty or a thing like that just be the reason, stuff goes downhill. Just move past it. So I think Michael Bunting is doing a better job of that now. It looks like he's able to do that. Guys earlier on, like the core guys, used to struggle with that at times, and they don't show up the officials anymore. It happens as you get older and more mature, and that will happen with Michael Bunting as well. And so I like to see that. Whenever I see this, of course, officials or whatever, I'm just kind of like, okay, it happened, but there were other things that happened in this game too, and it didn't have to go to that. And so I like that we're seeing Michael Bunting move past a lot of the distractionary stuff that happened the other night.
Yeah, I think that's really good to see, because it's very easy to let that consume you, and that's all you're thinking about, feeling like the refs are out to get you, or they're not going to give you a call. Like, I think for the most part, as much as we like to rag on the officials, they do a pretty good job, and if there is an infraction, they're going to call it. But the more times you try to show them up, or try to make them look stupid, they're gonna stick it to you, right? Like, that's just the way it is and has been for Michael Bunting at points this season. But the reality is he's got to get back in the good books, and that's the only way he's going to start drawing penalties once again. As much as he may think that's stupid, that's just the reality here for him and the officials. But I thought tonight was a really good first step. We didn't see him try to do anything too crazy as far as embellishment goes, or, what have you. He was just out there playing hockey, playing his game, digging in the corners, getting physical, trying to make some plays. And it just feels like it's going to be a matter of time that he, finds his way back into that top line role with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, because I'd have to imagine that's probably what Sheldon Keefe does want. The next Rink-Wide Toronto postgame show set for Wednesday night. Another big-time matchup for the Maple Leafs. They'll take on Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, and the Colorado Avalanche at Scotiabank.
Return of Dennis Mulligan.
We'll have. Oh, man. If Denny Mulligan, I am ready for the revenge game. Put down your bets. Dennis Mulligan is going to score. I know he's been on a bit of a hot streak of late, so he is primed and ready to come back into Toronto and just stick it to
former
Leafs
Leafs
Nation.
tearing up everywhere.
You can book that. Oh, man, it's going to be good. I guess the expectation is, you talked about before, Luke Shen probably making his Maple Leafs re-debut at Scotiabank Arena, so the crowd is going to be psyched for that when he sends Dennis Mulligan through the glass and into the fifth row with a crushing body check. You just know
I want
to
see how many Shen jerseys show up at the game on Wednesday.
Oh,
that's what I'm looking for. If people dust out the old number
question.
2.
Yeah, I think
Put an
what's
over
scary
under.
about people that are going to be breaking out those jerseys is that, when they bought them, they were probably like in their early 20s, and now they're our
Yeah.
age, right? Like
Yeah.
that's how long Luke Shen has been in the NHL. So they went from, young college students to now being older men with possibly families. So it's going to be interesting to see how many Shen jerseys, like you said, are going to be out in the mix at Scotiabank Arena on Wednesday night. But we'll have the post-game show for you here on Rink Wide Toronto. Make sure to like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on Twitter, Rinkwide TOR, D'Alter, RobWong34, and you can always get the podcast at rinkwidetoronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.